Okay, so session 40, the escape of the Lady of Eyes and Shadow. This has really been an ongoing adventure with some complications and difficulties. Every time I think she's getting away, the party find some means to catch up to her. Every time I think they're going to kill her, she manages to find some means to escape. It's been very interesting for me. I keep getting surprised by what's happening. I hope the players have been enjoying it. So last time when we left, Strife had managed to wreck her carriage as she was attempting to escape. He then proceeded to try and run down the side of the castle walls to go after her and catch up to her, lost his balance, managed to save himself, sling himself through the second story window of the castle. Gary and Vart had a confrontation with Ferry after he discovered that they were Solar Exalted, or in his eyes, Demon Anathema. And Grultz was still just taking care of the horses back at the inn. So as we picked up this time, Strife finds himself on the second floor, and he sees a woman dressed in almost pirate-like garb, but without the hat, charred sleeves and ash on her face. A woman who looks somewhat familiar, but he can't place her. He decides it's not worth his time at the moment, and he continues off after the Lady of Eyes and Shadow. Ferry is adamant he's not going to let Vart and Gary pass. However, Gary somewhat deftly manages to convince him, with the aid of Vart, that if he lets them go, the village won't be troubled. He won't be troubled anymore. He'll be able to go back to being a good little boy taking care of his city. So Ferry actually lets them pass, and as they go down the stairs, Vart sees the same woman that Strife just had the encounter with, and he actually recognizes her distinctly as the woman that was the fourth member of the party in the fight with the fight that they were transported to for the entertainment of the lost deity Mercer. He took interesting note of that, but just hurriedly moved on because, like Strife, he thought pursuing the Lady of Eyes and Shadows was more important. All three of them hurried back down to the village where they actually caught up with each other. And it was at this point that the village was starting to rouse from the commotion caused by the carriage being crashing through a building. Some of the people that were in that, or the tavern that Grultz was in, was sort of starting to come out. There was an old man, obviously somewhat intoxicated and potentially nearsighted, who had exited the building, apparently oblivious to the presence of the heroes, stubbed his toe on some of the wreckage, and then got spooked as a peacat suddenly displayed its fantastic green and blue tail feathers. It was also at the same time that Grultz exited the inn and was somewhat impressed with the peacat, which then proceeded to take off rapidly past the party. The group sort of looked on a little amused and confused about what was actually happening at this point. And then the old man just sort of continued on his way, which was roughly in the direction of the group. As he drew near, he sort of focused in on Vart a little bit and got closer and actually right up in his face, and then tapped his nose and said, "You know what, son? Some of us still remember the good old days," and then proceeded to walk off. That was a slightly strange encounter for Vart, who concluded that this old man's not going anywhere. I'll take care of business now with the lady, and I can come back and investigate that later if I need to. So the group, now rejoined with Grultz, proceeded to take off after the Lady of Eyes and Shadow, and to see if they could catch up with her to prevent her escape and save the governor, at least in their eyes, save the governor. Now, from a mechanical standpoint, this was really cool. I imported a mechanic from D&D called Skill Challenge, which doesn't belong in the system. because this is technically would be a chase or a race scene. And well, I explained it to the group, and they basically then proceeded to come up with creative ideas on ways they could either close the gap between them and the lady, or slow them down to close the gap. And it worked out really cool. I was so happy with the group and what they came up with, and it was very iconic to their characters. Worked really well. So Strife went first. Now he's just has this deep passion about running. It's actually part of his character, it's part of his background. And he was super excited. Even though he had the stone foot, he took off at an absolute sprint, and he moved very rapidly. However, he wasn't as rapid as a horse, and the Lady of the Eyes and Shadow, with the governor in tow on a second horse, managed to get further away from the group. It was at this point that Gary, the resident archer and thief, decided to take advantage of his bow and see if he could slow the horses down by firing a volley of arrows into the air in their direction, hopefully spooking them. This actually worked as the horses started darting around and they weren't able to traverse forwards as quickly in an effort to avoid these falling projectiles. Vart, then the sorcerer, the crafter, the investigator, and the deep thinker of the party, decided to use his intrinsic ability to assess a scene rapidly to see if he could garner any information from the crash scene that would help the rest of the group catch up to the lady. He did this very successfully, actually able to determine, based on the remains of some of the fallen horses, the carriage and the equipment, exactly what kind of horse they were, how they would move, what they're like, personalities, temperament. He conveyed this to the rest of the group, who were then able to apply that and use that information as they went after the group to actually gain on them. That worked really well, and again, very iconic and suiting to the character. Then Grultz went. He had a brilliant idea too, very much suited to his character, the resident fighter, warrior, all-round kick butt, beat you up kind of guy. He decided to try and harness his killing instinct and convey that in an intimidation attempt at the horses, with the same idea as Gary, as spooking them and slowing them down. Now, while he did this, he didn't do it particularly well, and what ended up happening was he actually scared the horses into running faster, so they lost some ground there, unfortunately, but they were still after them. At this point, Strife, the resident social expert, the diplomat, the talker guy, took his passion for running and channeled it into exhortation for the rest of the party, encouraging them with his own passion to accelerate their speed and movement. And it worked successfully. He actually helped the party really close the gap. And they were starting to draw near, although she was still some distance away, but it worked successfully. Then following that, Grultz made another attempt, a brilliant idea. He carries a 2-meter long staff on the end, which he has the blade of a grim scythe, a very deadly and powerful, intimidating weapon. As they were running along this pathway out of the village, there's forest either side, he used the hook of the blade to wrap around a tree, and his momentum to carry himself into a slingshot action around the tree and fling himself through the air, hoping to close the gap further. Unfortunately, while it was quite spectacular and well done, it wasn't actually enough to close the gap, and the horses proceeded to get away with the lady and the governor on them. As they escaped, the party saw the forming of mist and rain, specifically in the path that the party were actually taking. This is attributed to an effect that the Lady of Eyes and Shadows has that helps her horse that she's riding or leading run faster. It's just a byproduct, sort of similar to like what you might picture when a flame coming out of an animated car when it's traveling really fast or something like that. The group then sort of a little lost on what to do next and where they should go. There was a bit of talk about going back to the village because they had horses back there, which Grultz was taken care of before. So they went back, got the horses, decided to head back to the manse. And make plans from there. When they got into the manse, once they were all inside, they felt the familiar feeling that they get when they know the manse has shifted locations. It teleported them again to somewhere new. They looked outside and all they could see was fog. They knew it was pretty late. They'd had a big day. They needed rest. They decided, hey, let's just get to bed and we'll figure out what's going on tomorrow. And that's where we finished off. It was a short session because we had to start a little bit later. And yeah, it was a really good night. I had a great time. I hope the guys had a great time. They got some chances to sort of express their characters and their creativity. So until next time, peace.